Welcome to the January 2022 Student of the Month podcast episode. This month, we are recognizing Taylor Alapai for her tenacity. Taylor uses a very simple method to drill concepts, finger combinations, and briefs so that she always writes whatever is said correctly the first time. And when you combine her tenacity with her consistency, you will understand why in under 2 years from her first day of Steno school, she is now preparing to pass the RPR certification exam. Steno Squad, Taylor is tremendously consistent. I mean, she even practiced on her wedding day and every single day of her honeymoon. Stay tuned as Taylor will share all of her tips, tricks, and techniques for Steno success. Taylor, how did you hear about court reporting?
So I went to school for paralegal studies. I got a degree in that, and I ended up at the family courthouse, and I got really close with the court staff, but I got really close with the court reporters. Thought that they were always so interesting, and I was always watching them. I thought what they were doing was so fascinating, and they were always trying to convince me to go to school. That's how I found out about it.
So obviously the convincing worked. Okay.
It did, but it took a long time. I was at the courthouse for nearly 6 years, and I had a young son at the time, so they weren't shy about telling me how hard it was and how lengthy school can be. So I thought about it a lot. I went back and forth a lot, but finally, when my son was starting middle school, I was like, you know what? I'm just going to do it. What's the worst that can happen? So I did A to Z, and then I loved that, and I haven't looked back since.
Was the A to Z program, was that in person or online?
That was actually in person. That was right before everything with COVID happened. That was January 2020. I finished that in March 2020, so everything was still very much in person.
And when you did A to Z, was there any doubt that this is what you want to do?
No. If anything, it made me want to do it even more. I was so excited. I nearly stopped going to A to Z so I could start school because I think within the first class, I was like, this is it. I know I want to do this. I stuck with it for 6 weeks, but I was jonesing to start school. It just kind of affirmed that for me.
Like, what was it of being in the A to Z program that confirmed it on your first day?
Several different court reporters from different courthouses, and ones that actually freelance came in and talked to us, just their different experiences. And then when we'd actually get on the machine, it just felt right. It just, everything that I had learned about court reporting and that I had been told, it all came together, and it just felt so right. And I picked it up very easily, and it just made me really excited to go for it.
And basically right after, once A to Z was done, you were already enrolled in a Steno program.
Yes, yeah. I knew I wanted to do Mark's theory, and I wasn't really sure where I was going to go or what I was going to do, but Kim Xavier, she was the one that put on the A to Z program, and she had mentioned Steno keys. So I was like, you know what, this works for me. So I think I was, the same day that she had mentioned it, I think I was contacting you.
Okay. Yeah, I think, and you had your interview the first day, like basically you had A to Z like Sunday, and then you started Steno key on Monday.
Yeah.
And then you had your interview after the start date.
Yes. I know. I think I was like a tad late, but I was like, I'm going to convince her one way or another to let me join, because it had taken me so long to work up the courage to go back to school that I was like, you know what, I'm not going to let her have the option of not letting me start. And I was afraid to wait. I was afraid to give myself the out, because it's easy to, to just run away from it because it's a lot.
Right. And then when you think about it, starting on March 3rd, with everything that happened starting like March 18, 2020, with the lockdowns and stuff, it's almost like, if you didn't sign up then, who knows if you would have signed up.
Oh, I know. Well, and it actually kind of worked out perfectly, because I ended up leaving my job, and I was home and my son was home. So the timing was a good thing and a bad thing.
Right. Right. We're going to just try to focus on the positives.
Right.
And so how was that, though, with this pandemic and all the lifestyle changes that were happening in March of 2020 for you to start a new program in a new field?
It was scary. It was exciting, but it was scary. I was kind of excited to not have to deal with, because I'd been at my job for quite a while and I was full-time there. So I was excited with being at home and not having to go through all the procedures that I knew everybody was going through. I was glad to be home with my son, who was at home 24/7. But it was interesting. I knew that I was going to work part-time. I was going from full-time employment to self-employment, and I needed something flexible. So I knew I was going to be part-time, but that kind of changed throughout the year. My husband's job was affected by COVID quite a bit, so I ended up working a little more. It was all kind of up in the air. We had my mom live with us at one point, trying to be a teacher and a student and self-employed, and then, trying to keep my house in order. It was crazy. It worked out, though. Honestly, it was the best thing.
Well, how did you manage to balance your school time, your school Steno life, and then your family life and your self-employment? How were you able to keep everything organized with so many changes happening throughout the months?
I just had to be flexible. I started out a pretty rigid schedule, and I learned pretty quickly that just wasn't going to work. So I had a lot of really late nights, a lot of coffee, a lot of caffeine, because, a lot of times I wanted quiet, I wanted peace when I was working on school. So I had a lot of late nights after everyone was asleep and not asking for anything. So me and the machine, we got very close late at night.
What you were thinking when you made this rigid schedule, what did it really look like?
Yeah, I think I was probably too optimistic. I had everything planned. I had my son's schedule planned. I had my schedule planned down to like snack times, walking at certain times, starting school at certain times, taking a lunch at certain times, taking a break. It was down to like minutes. And then he would get an assignment from school and it would throw off my school schedule. So I just learned how to be really flexible with it. So that rigid schedule went out the window. But now that my son's back in school, I kind of have gone back to that, but not quite as rigid as before. I think I had high goals, and I think the real world kind of just made that impossible.
When you're making this schedule, like the current schedule that you have now, like let's say this month, how are you fitting in your practice time?
I'm setting off a block of time in the middle of the day when my husband's at work, when my son is in school. I kind of silence my phone, put away all my distractions, and I try to set a 4-hour block. And sometimes if I'm feeling really good, it'll go into the evening after everyone's gone to bed and I'll stay up. But I try to, after I'm done with the little bit of work I have in the morning and my household stuff, then I will set off a block of time that I know that I have to do school. And sometimes I have to change it, sometimes when things come up. But I know that there's a certain amount of time that I would like to do school, and I make a point to start it at the same time every day and to finish it at the same time.
What is the importance in starting and stopping at the same time each day?
I'd be probably hard on myself if I felt like I was doing something that wasn't productive for school. If I thought that I was relaxing or doing something that didn't pertain to school, I would be really hard on myself. So once I started setting a block of time off solely dedicated to school, I realized that as long as I get this done, then I don't have to feel guilty if I want to spend time with my family, to go run this errand or do that. It really made me feel better about what I was doing, and it actually made me more productive.
That's actually really important because if you're like, I'm just going to practice tomorrow, if you don't have a stop time, you're going to feel guilty throughout the rest of the day, even if you practice for an hour or 2 or 3, because you're going to be wondering, was that enough?
Yes.
Or could I have done more, or should I be doing more? And I think the stop time is actually just as important as the start time. And it will help avoid, like, help lessen the guilty feelings.
Yes, yeah. I
And
was feeling guilty all the time.
and I noticed before, and you kind of mentioned it, but earlier last year, your practice times were really like around 11 p.m., midnight, 1 a.m. What was that like?
It was crazy. When I first left my full-time job, I knew I was going to be working a little bit. I knew I was going to be working part-time, but when my husband wasn't able to work because of COVID, I started working full-time. So working full-time, I was helping my son with school, I was cooking, I was cleaning, and then finally, when I had my own time, I would sit down late at night, and I've always been a night owl, so I kind of just went with it. It was my time. I enjoyed it, but it started really messing with my internal clock, so I had to kind of adjust that a little bit. I wasn't giving my best self to Steno, and I wanted to make sure I was giving my best self and putting my Steno not first, not before my family, but making it a priority because I owed it to myself.
Well, first of all, where are you steno-wise? How would you explain to a steno student where you are currently as a stenographer?
I can see the light at the end of the tunnel. I'm really close. Everything's starting to come together. I'm gaining speed. I'm done with theory. I think I'm very close to being able to pass the RPR, but I haven't yet tackled jury charge and Q&A. So I'm very close to the finish line, but not quite there.
So how are you doing with your lit?
Well, it depends on the day. Some days I feel really good. I think a lot of it has to do with self-confidence and not doubting myself. If I can get over some of my own doubts and anxiety, then I'm right where I need to be or close. But I think...
Okay, well, so right now you're working at 180, like your lit files that you've been doing, you've been passing a few of them at 180, and that's pretty much your speed right now for literature files is 180. You're doing the RPR prep at 180, 190-ish and stuff. And your grades are great. In my opinion, I mean, it's not even an opinion. It's the numbers don't lie. Your grades are great. So what do you think it is that makes you have doubts about your performance?
I've always been a good student, and school's always been very easy to me, but Steno is unlike anything else. And I think anything that's not a 90 or above, or maybe even a 95 or above makes me doubt myself, when that's not really necessarily true with Steno. It's a whole different beast. So even though I think I'm doing well, my mind plays tricks on me sometimes that, well, it's not a 97. Sometimes I think that you can hold yourself back by hesitating or second guessing yourself. So if I would just let go of some things, I could get through this mental block.
So what are some things that you'll do, like, to pick yourself up with Steno, like to build your confidence?
Sometimes I like to go back to previous chapters and to work on files from previous chapters, and when I get a good score on those for the first try, it really builds my confidence back up, and it shows me how far I've come, because if I'm working on a particularly difficult file with a bunch of new words or write it out words, take a hit on your confidence. So when I go back and I ace one of the older chapter files, it really makes me see how far I've come, and it pumps me up to keep going.
So just so I can explain for the listeners, chapters 1 through 24 at Steno Key is mainly random sentences focused on the concepts taught in that chapter. And then once you're in 24 and up, you're getting a lot more lit practice. And especially when you start in chapter 32, you have like real lit files all the way up to chapter 40. So when you were in chapters 1 through 24, when you were just dealing with sentences, were any of those chapters hard for you?
I remember thinking they were. There were a select few that I remember really standing out to me as difficult. But now that I'm tackling RPR files, they're nothing like what I'm tackling now. But it makes me realize I thought this was hard when I was doing it then, and then going back, it seems much easier now. So I'm hoping that will be the case for these RPR files.
So how is your practice different from when you were doing chapters 1 through 24, even 1 through 39, and now that you're doing RPR practice? How has your routine changed?
When I was doing the previous chapters, it was very like file heavy. I was just doing files constantly, and that's really all I was focusing on.
Dictation files?
Yes, dictation files. Mm-hmm. Now that I am working on the RPR files, I've incorporated a few different things. I've incorporated finger drills back in. Now I practice numbers, spelling. I'm varying the speeds of my dictation files. I have joined in on the Crime Junkies Zoom session. And then there's another court reporter that has like live dictation reads that she has been doing, and just kind of adding a few different things into and trying to practice different material, I think has helped, because now it's becoming more real. So instead of just focusing on the dictation files, I'm kind of trying to incorporate as many things as I can into my practice.
So when you're thinking of your steno time, like now getting ready for the RPR, how much percent of your steno time would you say is on the machine, like actually writing on the machine?
80. 80% of my time.
All right, so you'd say 80% of your time, of your steno time, you're on the machine.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, and then the other 20%, what would you say next to?
The other 20%, I'm probably transcribing, and
okay.
then I'm working on grammar and other stuff.
Okay, so like of the 80% of the time that you're on the machine, or out of the time that you're on the machine, how much of it is spent drilling, whether it's finger drills or your hesitation words or a theory concept versus dictation?
Oh, gosh.
I know we're not like mathematicians, but I think it's really important to see.
This is why I went to court reporting.
Right?
I'd say I spent a lot of time drilling. I'd say nearly half of that. I'd say half of it writing and then the other half drilling, honestly. I spend just because if I ever have anything that I hesitate on, I drill nonstop.
Walk us through. You have a hesitation word. How do you eliminate that hesitation word? What are the kinds of things that you do to eliminate that word from your hesitation list to make it a word that you write automatically?
I will add it to my hesitation list, and then I'll do the Oreo method, but I will for sure add it to my hesitation list.
What's the Oreo method?
There's a section of a file that you have missed or dropped, then you'll work on the section before, the section in the middle, and then the section afterwards. So I'll do that several times and the hesitation list. That way, in the future, I can go back to that and just make sure I drill it enough.
The camera broke out to say the one before, the one after.
So I'll do the Oreo method. I will work on the section before the section that was missed. I'll work on the section that was actually missed, and then I will work on the section afterwards.
Like the sentence or like the phrase before and after. Okay.
The sentences or phrases. Because sometimes you're not quite sure what you're hesitating on until you really to see what it is. Sometimes you'll hesitate and then you'll drop a few things and then you'll realize the stuff you dropped wasn't actually what you hesitated on. It was the word that you actually got. Right. You hesitated and spent that time.
Right. Use the Oreo method as a way of really identifying what was that hesitation word. Yes. And then you add that hesitation word to the list.
Yes.
So how are you organizing your hesitation list? Like, is it a notebook? Is it a Post-it note? Is it an Excel file?
Well, I used to do Post-it notes until I had over 100 Post-it notes on my desk. So now I have just an ongoing, like a Word file, and I will go in and I'll just edit it daily. It's changed quite a bit since the beginning of school, but the words that I have down, of course, I'll take off the list, but I'll add a word, several a day to it.
Okay.
Sometimes it's new words. Sometimes it's old words that I thought I had down, but I didn't quite have down. It's evolving daily.
So once you have the word on your list, how do you eliminate it?
So I just drill it over and over again.
What does that mean when you're saying drill it over and over?
I'll just write it over and
Okay.
over again. Sometimes I will write it to music and I'll just try to make it fun. Like I'll go down the list. I'll have Eclipse open and then I'll have my word file with all my trouble words and I will just drill it to music and try to make it fun because those words are definitely not fun.
And
so I try to make it exciting.
How long will you spend in a day going over that hesitation list?
Maybe 20 minutes.
20 minutes a day?
Yes, yeah.
And then how long will a word typically stay on your list?
Maybe a couple of days, sometimes not even, sometimes longer. Sometimes it just depends on the word or how many syllables it has.
So there's like no secret sauce or anything to this list. Like you just write the word over and over again and go down the list.
I just drill it. I had high hopes of using one of those. I know that there's some websites that offer, like, I don't know if it's a reading or whatnot of words, but I found that it was a time saver just to work. Sometimes I'll use Real Time Coaches. They have where you can create your own file and you can add those words in. Sometimes I'll use that, but sometimes I'm just trying to fit in as much as I can in my practice session, so I'll just work off of my Word document.
Sometimes trying to come up with that perfect method, eliminating hesitation words can be time consuming and it could be distracting and maybe is not necessary, especially not for every single hesitation word. Some hesitation words can take you longer than others and may require different strategies than just going down the list, but sometimes just going down the list is enough. Okay, so we were talking about what your practice routine is like and now getting ready for the RPR. Us through a dictation. So let's say today you're doing a 180 lit dictation. How do you prepare to take that 180 lit dictation file? What do you do when you know you're having a great writing day? What are the things that you do before you start that dictation file?
Before I even attempt a dictation file, I'll make sure I'm warmed up. So I'll do 20 minutes of finger drills. I'll do 20 minutes of numbers, finger spelling. And then once I feel good and warmed up, I will attempt the file. But I usually don't want to attempt them until I'm warmed up. Now that I'm working on the RPR files, I usually try to make sure my fingers are nice and warmed up and I feel good. Usually when I do the finger drills and the number practice, I'll practice to music. So I try to make sure I'm in the right headspace. Because before when I was doing dictation files, they were serious. But now I take the RPR files very seriously, so I always make sure I'm just in the right headspace.
Now, when they say ready, begin, You're writing. Are you behind the speaker? Are you trailing the speaker? Are you on top of the speaker? How's that going?
It varies. Sometimes I'm right on top of him. Sometimes I'm trailing. Sometimes I feel like I can't get anything. But the more RPR files I do, the more confident I am and the more I'm on top of the speaker.
We all know that Magnum Steno is like super phrase heavy. Yes. Are you using a lot of those phrases when you're doing 180 lit?
I am. I'm using a lot, but I'm also probably writing out more than I should. But I don't know. I think it's probably 50-50. I'm using quite a bit, but I'm also writing out quite a bit. I find that I write out way more when it's at a higher speed compared to when I drop this briefs because I have a little more time to think of them on the fly.
For a typical 180 lit, would you say your writing is clean? Would you say it's a little messy?
It's a little messy.
Do you find it easy to read through your Steno notes?
Yeah, I've gotten pretty good at reading through the messy parts.
Okay.
I'll look at it and I'll be like, I know what I was trying to do.
Okay, yeah, it's important to be able to recognize your slop as well, like to be able to read through it, recognize it. I think that's why it's important that even when you have a bad writing day, you still want to look at what your writing is looking like so you could recognize any, just those kind of things that you would write when you're not having a great writing day. How often are you actually looking at your Steno notes?
Probably not as much as I should. I'm constantly transcribing, so I'm kind of looking at them when I'm transcribing, but as far as reading everything back, just to read my notes and read everything back, I don't do that probably as much as I should. I feel like transcribing, you're reading little bits here and there, but as far as reading all of them. That would probably help. But at this point, I'm pretty good at reading my slop.
So, like, you don't feel that? I mean, it's like you kind of said two different things. It's like, do you feel like reading it back is helpful, but not necessary right now? Is that basically the summary?
Yeah, I think it's necessary when you're learning. I mean, I know it's necessary all the time, but especially when you're learning theory and you're trying to remember those briefs or how to write something a certain way, I think it's extremely beneficial to read your notes. But now that I'm working on RPR files and I'm transcribing, I probably don't do it as much as I used to when I was initially learning the theory.
And so now with the RPR coming up, are you more focused on speed? Are you focused on your real-time translation? What are you like, would you say is your number one focus?
Speed is definitely my number one focus. I don't know if it should be, but it is. I'm sure accuracy should be at the top of the list, but I'm really good at reading through my slop.
So I'm sure this is a contentious topic, but I think with how you're doing it is fine. I think focusing on the speed, getting something down for every word that's spoken, especially if you can read through it, you can pass. You can pass when you read through your slop. But if you just drop everything, even if it would have been perfect if you actually wrote it, you're not going to pass. So it's like,
exactly.
Let's make sure our fingers are moving and getting something, and we can figure it out later. One of the things that kind of brought up earlier before we started recording this episode was about finger drills and how when you were in the beginning of theory, chapters 1 through 31, you were really doing your finger drills. And then in chapter 32, where you weren't receiving a finger drill packet for every chapter, it kind of slid by the wayside. And you mentioned to me now you're bringing it back in. So explain to me like what happened, because I remember cause there were people that I felt like they weren't doing their finger drills properly, and I was putting on these webinars on how to do finger drills properly, and somebody asked, one of the participants was like, well, is there anyone that you can say does finger drills perfectly? And I answered Taylor, like 100%, hands down, it's Taylor. She's the one who does it the absolute best. And so how do you go from that to, oops, I haven't done finger drills for like 2 months, like, and now you're back to doing them. So talk us through that whole journey.
Well, I think they are really beneficial. I think I got so focused with learning the theory that I just kind of let go to the side. And I was like, you know what, I'll incorporate them later. But I was so ready to get through theory that I kind of just let them go. And then as I started gaining more speed, I realized how important they were. I realized that they helped with speed, they helped with agility. I started listening to other people who had passed the RPR, and a lot of them had mentioned finger drills, and so I was like, you know what, I need to bring those back in. And it seems that they have only helped me, and I kind of wish that I would have never let them go to the side, but they're helping me now. They've been very beneficial.
And one of the things I remember is that you would say you would stay stuck on an outline or two when you're doing your finger drills, and you're like, I'm not leaving until I'm getting this right.
Yes.
And until I can get this right with no errors, no hesitation, at this beat per minute, whatever your metronome speed was, that was your goal. When you said it, the way you said it, and I was like, yes, that is the secret. Like, that is what people, if they can do their finger drills like that, they're going to get success the way you've been getting success.
You want it to be somewhat challenging. You want to push yourself and increase your speed and work on the most trickiest finger drills. You want to push yourself. Otherwise, you're not really doing anything. And I think that I'm so OCD that I always wanted to push myself with finger drills. So it became a lot. Like, it became something entirely on its own. So I think, it became too much for me. And so I let it go, and now it's back.
So do you feel like you were spending too much time on the finger drills because you were so perfectionist about it? Yeah.
I was spending way too much time on finger drills. And it was really getting to me.
Like, the thing with finger drills is it's challenging, and it's a good challenge, but it's a comfortable challenge, if that makes sense, versus the challenge of doing a new dictation and not knowing what's going to come at you, at least you're in control of the challenge when it's like, here are 3 outlines that I'm working on going back and forth between versus a 200 lit of congressional speech. Because I find myself doing that too when I would practice, as I would spend, I mean, I would still see the benefit, but sometimes it's like, okay, yes, they're beneficial, but other things are beneficial too, you know, and you need to be like well-rounded as a writer and to visit those things as well. In what other ways would you see that you're, I don't know what the word, I don't want to say OCD, but like where you're just like, I have to get it right. Does that show up in you when you're doing your dictations? Are you doing a dictation file like 10 times in a row, or writing a sentence that you hesitated on 30 times in a row? Like, is there something repetitive like that you do?
Yes. So I drill a lot. After my first take, I don't like to do another take unless I'm quite certain that I've got everything. So after my first take, I will drill and drill and drill. And sometimes it becomes too much. Sometimes I get a little too OCD and an hour passes. I'm like, okay, I need to move on. But sometimes I do get a little too drill happy. And it's just because I'm a perfectionist and I don't want to see a bad grade. So I know if I at least have one take in and I know what to expect and I know I can drill it, then I want that second grade to show what I know.
Do you think getting a grade for every transcript that you do is helpful, or do you kind of wish maybe you didn't have to grade everything, or how do you feel about it?
I think it is helpful. I think it lets you know where you're at. I think sometimes, though, it can work against you, though. I think sometimes if you get a little too into your head, it can mess with your confidence, or it can keep you maybe hanging on to a file. But I do think it is beneficial. I think it's a double-edged sword, really.
Yeah, I think so too. I think it's necessary, but you have to be like really strong-minded to be receiving a grade for every single dictation that you attempt every day. Yes. Even though you don't really have bad grades, like, what do you do when you feel like you have a bad grade? Like, how do you keep going?
I will usually do an older file just so I know, okay, I'm not crazy. This is a hard file. And I have made improvements. I have come a long way. So either I'll take a break, I'll walk away, I'll go back and do a previous file just to remind myself, how far I've come.
I think that would be wise for students to have a list of dictation files that are their feel-good files. Like, yes. Practice this when you need to build confidence, and
Absolutely.
It will be one of those files that they know that they could. Yeah, it's definitely necessary.
That would help.
So you've been excelling in the Steno Key program. Why do you think it is? Like, I feel like you don't really interact too much with other participants too much, but you observe the Facebook group. You go to some of the Steno chats that we have. What is it within you what is it like when you're listening to other people and you're seeing they're struggling? Like, what do you think, what do you want to tell them? Like, how do you think they can get better?
This is a hard one. I mean, for me, I'm just incredibly stubborn. I'm so stubborn. In court pouring, I think it's so mental. And I think most people can do that. I was going to say I have to do it. I think it's possible for anyone to get through a Steno program. I think it just has to do with being consistent and being positive and just not giving up on yourself and telling yourself, you're going to get through this. You court reporter, I think you have to envision yourself being a court reporter, because there's so many times where when you are doing poorly on tests, you start questioning things. But I think you just have to accept that you're going to be a court reporter and there's no other option. I've really given myself no other option. I quit my job. I used all of my savings. I've given myself no other option. And that's just it. I'm going to be a court reporter, and there's nothing else. I have no backup plan.
Everything you mentioned is really mental. Like, you didn't say anything about practice more or practice less. It's just like, that's really what it is. And when you have a certain mindset, that's going to make it so that you're able to say no to certain things or yes to certain things, and you're able to schedule your life around making your priorities a priority.
You do have to enjoy it. So I try to make it fun. I try to practice to music. I try to enjoy it. I don't want to dread coming into my office to practice. I want to make it fun. So I make sure my office is a good environment. It's happy. I have a vision board. I mean, you have to be consistent with practice, but also you have to make it enjoyable. And you have to be excited about it and where you'll end up.
So with you being in this pilot program, and this is your first Steno school ever, and, you know, with social media, I know you still make a little time to read other people's experience, and they're going through different programs and stuff like that. Do you ever doubt the path that you've taken with being at Steno Key? And I'm assuming the answer is always going to be yes, because you're always going to have to be thinking about, well, what about these other programs and stuff? But how do you then keep yourself back focused on Steno Key?
I think it's really normal to question any program that you're in. If you're not questioning, then I think something's wrong, because there's so many different theories and you're always questioning, well, did I pick the right theory? Did I pick the right school? And you start questioning yourself, then of course going to question the school that you're in. But I think just looking back at how many people have gone through court reporting school and thinking of how lucky we are now to have, you know, everything be digital as far as the software and our machines. I think back about the people that went through court reporting school who had the paper machines, and I think about them not having laptops, and I think, well, if they can do it, then I can do it. And it really doesn't matter. As long as you have the material, you have the theory, you can get through it. It's just really up to you and how much work you put in. But just knowing that all of the things that we have now to help us get through school, it's so possible. And especially with people who are self-taught, it's possible to get through any program, I believe.
I agree. I mean, of course, certain programs can make things easier, and of course, certain programs can make things harder. But I do feel that the people who have graduated from Steno school, I feel like they could have graduated from a number of different Steno schools and they would have still graduated. Yes. So it's not like, oh, I only graduated because I went to this particular school. I don't think that's the case.
I think it's dependent on the person for sure.
I feel like everybody wants to learn Magnum Steno theory, but when you think of it, 90-something% of the court reporters that are working today that Magnum Steno theory didn't even exist when they were in school, and they made it.
Yes, I think about that a lot, thinking about how much they were stroking out, and they still managed to get to the speed that they needed to be at.
I think it's important that whichever route you take, whatever theory, whatever school, whatever machine or software you buy, is to remind yourself, this was a good decision for me, and I'm going to make the best out of it, and I can be successful with it. Because if you're in a Sten Ed school and then you keep thinking, oh, I'm sure if it was Magnum, it would be a shorter way of writing this. And you're just like having a negative outlook on the Sten Ed, or you're having a negative outlook because your program is using EV360 and you wish they were using Real-Time Coach, or you have a Luminix, but you really wish you had a Blaze, and you're having all these thoughts. That mindset is not going to propel anybody to graduate any faster. It's going to make you resent doing whatever you're doing.
Absolutely.
And I think it's important to, whatever theory you learned, whatever school you went to, is find somebody who went to that same program or learned that same theory and is currently working. And so that way you have like a mentor, but also a reminder that, hey, I can be successful with these materials.
Absolutely. And you can always tweak your theory later on. So it's, it's just getting to that speed and being able to pass the test, and then you can change it later on. You can tweak it and you can learn a shorter theory. I think there's a lot of people now that are learning Magnum Steno that have been working court reporters for a long time.
Absolutely. Yep, definitely. And I know recently you actually have been being more friendly with other participants. What do you feel was like the transition in that, where now you're being super friendly?
I have noticed that you're not antisocial anymore, Taylor.
Right.
I think it was really easy to just keep my head down. Dealing with she was living with us, so it was really easy for me to just keep my head down. From the beginning of the program, I just kept my head down and I just focused on the files and learning theory. I didn't have a lot of time to interact with people. My mom was sick. She was living with us. My son was at home. I was helping him with school. I just didn't have a lot of extra time. But as I progressed through the program, once I started working towards the RPR, I realized I needed a little something more. I needed accountability. I needed community. It was easy to go through theory, keeping my head down. But once I started really getting challenged with speed and needing accountability to just stay positive and to, I guess, just try something different, because I felt like I was hitting a couple of roadblocks. I felt like I was doubting myself. So I started reaching out to other people who really seemed to have a positive mindset. And it really has made a big difference. And there's a goal group that has a couple of people from Steno. And it's really helped me stay on task, because it's easy, once you start working on speed building, it's really easy to get stuck and to not push yourself. So it's really held me accountable. And I wish I kind of would have interacted with people earlier on. I didn't have the time, but now I'm seeing how important it is. And you need a sense of community, especially when we're all working online or doing school online. I think it's all about mindset when you're going through court reporting school. So if you talk with other people who are going through the same struggles you are, and you can kind of lift each other up, makes a huge difference.
100% agree. I'm really happy that you're friendlier now, because I always wanted you to be more friendly, because I was like, oh man, you have so much that you can share with everybody, and everybody wanted to hear from you. Because everybody would see how well you were progressing through the program.
And I feel so bad. And truly, when I was focusing on Steno, it was at midnight. Sometimes I would start at 9 or 10 o'clock at night, and I wouldn't finish until 3 or 4. During the time when everybody was interacting, I was either working or taking care of my son or my mom. And so I missed out. I feel like I missed out a lot of the community. And I hate feeling like I was antisocial. And it wasn't from not wanting to. It was just from, I was just so focused on getting through it that I kind of made myself unavailable, and I'm sorry.
It's all good. We're happy you're here now. And so now we're wrapping up 2021. We're heading into 2022. What are your Steno goals for 2022?
I am definitely taking the RPR in March. My goal is to get through my RPR files, my practice files for lit, and feel very confident about those. And then to start working on jury charge and Q&A. That's my big goal. And then I would like to start an internship in the spring, possibly. But my main goal is to take the RPR in March.
And you're in Texas. Are you planning on working in Texas?
Yes. I would like to be an official in the county that we live in, but I'm sure I'll have to freelance for a little bit, but I do plan on working in Texas.
Okay. I don't think you have to freelance. I think you can intern and learn the ropes there, and then they'll hire you. Yeah,
that would be my dream.
I'm pretty sure.
That would be my dream.
And you'll have to take the Texas certification test.
Yes.
So I guess that will probably be more like summertime for you.
Yes, I think so.
All right. I like it. It sounds great. I brought up the wedding day, honeymoon stuff, or did I?
I'm always listening to books or podcasts when I'm working or doing house stuff. So I've just increased the speed just so higher, faster sounding stuff, it makes more sense, or it sounds normal to me.
You've been listening to high speed dictation.
Yes.
It's really audiobooks, but
yes.
You just at a higher speed. You're training your ear so that sounds normal.
Yes.
And so then when you go to a 180 later in the day, how does that feel? Or sound?
It actually, it feels better. I remember whenever I first started court reporting school, anything above 180 sounded extremely fast. And it doesn't sound quite as fast anymore. It sounds normal. Of course, anything 200 and above is sounding a little fast, but now 180 sounds pretty normal to me.
Okay, that's good. there anything else that you do that's like not 100% Steno related, but you feel it's contributed to your Steno success?
I think staying active. I've always been active, and when a big priority for me was making sure me and my son were active while we were at home all the time. We're always hiking or kayaking or doing something active, and I think it's really helped with just being able to stay healthy mentally and physically while tackling Steno, because it's so emotionally and mentally and physically draining. Being your best health-wise has really helped me.
Have you made any changes to the theory that you're writing? Like, have you decided, like, I'm not going to write a certain phrase this way? Have you started to personalize the Magnum Steno theory into the Taylor theory?
Oh, a few words that I have that I can't think of them right now.
Okay.
But I know there have been a few words where I'm like, nope, that just doesn't make sense to me. That's not going to stick. So I will write it a way that makes more sense to me. And maybe I should keep a list of those. But now I've kind of just incorporated it in. I try to stick with Mark's theory, but there's just a couple that just don't make sense.
Are you finding alternative ways, like in one of those brief groups, or are you like looking up on Briefpedia for a different outline, or are you making up your own outline and checking it against the dictionary to make sure it doesn't conflict, or what are you doing?
The latter. I'm making up my own outline and then just making sure it doesn't conflict.
Yeah, I think that's better. Sometimes you'll see something and it doesn't make sense, and my first question is, okay, what would make sense to you? Because
Right.
if it would make sense to you, you could make use of it. And then if it doesn't conflict, or it's like conflicting for a word you don't even know what it means, like just use it then. Like it'll be better off that way.
Or if I find that I'm writing something a certain way that's not taught, but it just, I keep going back to that way, I'll just incorporate that way. If it doesn't conflict with anything else, because obviously that makes sense to me.
Absolutely. Totally get it. It's usually like words that were misstrokes, and I was like trying to get rid of them as a misstroke, and I was like, you know what? I just need to make this a stroke. It's not a misstroke anymore. It's my stroke. All right. So Taylor, I really appreciate you coming on this episode, you being the student of the month, and everything that you've been able to contribute as a participant in the Steno Key program, but also with this episode, how you're going to be able to help so many future professional stenographers. And on that note, do you have any parting words of wisdom that you'd like to share with our audience?
And that's so cliche, but it's just like, what do you want out of your life? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? From 5 years from now, even if it takes you that long to do school, if you didn't do school, you'd still be in the same spot in 5 years. So why not give it what you can and take a chance on yourself? There are so many times where I dismissed the option of going back to school because I was a young mom and I had a lot of responsibilities. And, I finally just took a risk and I did it. And I'm so glad that I did. I'm not quite finished, but I see the light at the end of the tunnel, and I'm so glad that I took the risk, and anybody who wants to should. So yeah.
Definitely.